I am so conservative.
Rationalize in my head. These are things I read in
And
the
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
I
invited...
remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah. I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative.
And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. Today, our associate, Ken Ammi, joins us to talk about his book, The King, Og of Bashan, is Dead, the Man, the Myth, the Legend of a Nephilim Giant? My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast, and our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby himself.
Here I am. Listen, did that cause you any trouble when you're going for your driving test? You know, you couldn't turn left.
It does. It makes them really nervous for sure.
Yeah, it'll probably get worse as you get older and they want to test you again. I don't know how often that happens.
That makes me testy when they do that, by the way.
I bet it does. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came outside its shadow. Now we have 12 more months of summer, except wait. Oh, no. We are in the path. Right there is where I am, and right here is where my son is. We are in the path of what is now Tropical Storm Ian. At this time, it is called Tropical Storm Ian. It is expected to be a hurricane.
Is that the path of least resistance, by the way?
I don't know what it is, but it keeps going. You know, yesterday morning that were right here, this where it was making landfall was right here. We were in the bullseye yesterday, yesterday morning. And now we're not. And by the time people watch this, it'll be history. Hopefully.
Well, right. And so we should mention we are pre-recording this just in case that you got swept away with a hurricane. We didn't want to miss an opportunity to make people miserable.
Yeah, we know the hurricane will be history, just in case I'm history too. Yeah, we want to make sure we get this in. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is My Bible, guaranteed the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own. And our regular legal disclaimer, our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that's Ken Ammi, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast here. If anyone knows the webcast, although we probably not mentioned it again, the satirical content includes any and all and commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Our regular announcements notice: the opinions expressed in this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it, or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. Never fear, never fear. This webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now the latest feature of the Unknown Webcast is the fake applause. Greetings, Ken Ammi. We can't afford real fake applause, so we have fake.
He's got the royal wave down.
Yes, and yeah, you are. Oh, you're all set, guy. All right. Thank you for coming.
Yeah. Well,
whatever this is.
Talking about tall tales of the king of Og of Bashan. Tall tales, they are, right?
Well, were they tall guys? Or was it Og of Bashan a tall guy? No, we know a Meg Basham. Is she any relation? She's at
maybe she
Daily
writes
Wire.
tall tales. She's a journalist. Maybe she writes
The
tall
Daily
tales.
Wire, yeah. So.
Yeah, that wasn't his last name, so it's not.
That was his. Well, you know, they
He wasn't Mr. Bashan.
But place names became last names, right? Like, you know, Og. Maybe
Yeah, that's true.
if it was
Yeah.
Irish, he could have been Bashan, eventually. Or Bashan. So,
Well, one of the things that Ron and I were talking about just before we started this was a recent study. The State of Theology came out a couple of weeks back, and Christianity Today did an article in which they pointed out that 56%, count them, 56% of evangelical respondents affirmed that God accepts the worship of all religions, including Christianity, fortunately, including Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and that is up from 42% in 2020. So in a mere 2 years, they've grown 14 percentage points in being all-inclusive, that all religions are equally valid and acceptable to God. So when you have that kind of belief system, is it any question, I ask you, that the mythology of the Nephilites is embraced?
Nephilites. You're saying
What say you?
Yeah, that works. In fact, so I'll give you just a little bit of background on how I ended up in the position of writing a book about Og. And incidentally, I mentioned in the introduction that I was mentioning to a friend, yeah, I'm writing a book about Og. And he said, well, what does the Bible say about him? And I said, virtually nothing. And he says, well, how are you going to write a whole book about him? And well, here comes the rest of the story, right?
Make stuff up.
Yeah. So basically, the way I thought about it at one point is, okay, you have God and you have earth dwellers, but then there's this whole in-between realm, right? And I'm just wondering what the Bible said about all of those beings. So I did an in-depth, systematic biblical study of all of it. And that's why I refer to myself as a systematic biblical paranormalologist.
Paranormalist, I love
it. Incidentally, by the way, somebody, I was on somebody's show and they said I'm a leading voice in biblical systematic paranormology, and I said, well, it's easy to be a leading voice when you're pretty much the only one.
You're
exactly.
You are the field.
But looking back, I'm glad that I did it all at once, because it did force me to systemize, right? So in other words, I don't have an angelology that's detached from my demonology, or a satanology that's detached from my cherubology, or all these different ologies aren't just completely separate and don't jive together. I was able to kind of make a systematic view of all of them in as much as it's possible, because these are issues about which the Bible doesn't tell us very much, what makes it all the much more important that we do handle the little bits we're told very carefully, very accurately.
Yeah.
And so then that led me to write a book series, what does the Bible say about? And one of them was about just angels, one of them just about demons, just about Satan. And well, one of them was about Nephilim and quote unquote giants. And by now I've written like 10 books just on Nephilology or giantology. And I noticed I kept running across references to Og and all of that mix. And I wondered why, because it doesn't make sense whatsoever. If you're going to refer to him as a quote unquote giant or as a Nephil, he doesn't belong there. So how are people constantly referring to Og? And I mean, obviously I know why. It's just that that was the exploration. Why does this guy keep being mentioned, especially when we're barely told anything about him whatsoever? Yeah. And so that's part of my title, is the exploration is the man, the myth, the legend, right? So who was the man versus what has been made of him? And
what's
then
part of the Bible? Where is he even mentioned?
Well, here and there. I mean, he's literally just mentioned in passing, right? But the key verse is Deuteronomy 3:11.
Okay.
Now I'm going to read it in the King James version, not the King Don version. So it states that only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the children of Ammon? 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. And that's really the bottom line. That's why anybody involved in Nephilology or Giantology would ever even bother talking about Og, is that sentence right there. That's the bottom line. So now, yeah, go ahead.
So it looks like he is really mentioned most in Deuteronomy. I'm going back now to check that. Yeah, a bunch of references in Deuteronomy, most of them clustered together in the first 4 chapters, and then one in chapter 29. A couple of references in Numbers, so that comes first. Some in Joshua. You even have it mentioned in First Kings, Nehemiah, in the Psalms too. So is this the same Og all throughout these historical books of the Old Testament? Or is there,
it's the same Og, and he's just mentioned in passing right along with a bunch of other kings. It's like, look, we have to deal with this guy and his hordes, and let's move on from there. Like nothing is really specified about him. That's why the Deuteronomy 3:11 verse is the one everybody latches onto, because you get more than just that this guy was named Og and he was a Repha and he reigned over the area of Bashan, or
he tossed and turned in his sleep a lot, so he really needed a big bed. I mean, that's what I'm getting from this, right? He probably rolled around. Oh, but that's not what everybody's been getting from it, have they?
No, and that's the second part of the subtitle with the question mark at the end, which I'm glad Don emphasized. So is this the man, the myth, the legend of a Nephilim giant?
Yeah.
And so that raises a few issues. One is that I purposefully miswrote my subtitle, because anybody who understands the linguistics behind this realizes that I used the singular English a followed by a male plural Hebrew im. So that alone just doesn't make sense. But that was just to emphasize that if you read virtually anything on Nephilology, you're going to run across those poor linguistics.
It's big. Now, this is a cover of Ken's book.
And Ken just referred to the word Nephilim, which is a Hebrew plural, but you can't be a plural of anything.
Right. Exactly.
So he was a Nephil, right?
well, that's part of the debate, which
wasn't Aaron Nephil a really good singer? I think he had a record with Linda Ronstadt. Oh no. Yeah, but no, Nephilim is, so part of the debate is what? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Well, for one, as soon as you see somebody referring to a Nephilim, you already know that they haven't exactly done their homework. That's just for starters.
They should say one of the Nephilim. That would be okay, right?
Oh, yes, or a Nephil.
A Nephil.
Right, obviously. I mean, and then the term Nephilim giant, well, contextually, biblically, that would read Nephilim, because that's all that within the context of Nephilim, the English word giant, it's just rendering, not even translating, it's rendering the word Nephilim. That's all it's doing there. It's not describing anything.
It's assuming that that's what the word means.
Well, it's not even assuming that's what it means, because we don't really know what it means yet. So it's just rendering it. So, in other words, wherever you see the English word giant in conjunction with Nephilim, you need to stop thinking about whatever you subjectively imagine giant might mean. It's just reading Nephilim, period. That's all it is. And that's let me just give a little background on that.
Just to reiterate, what you're saying here then is to look at it the way that many are looking at it, is to say that the king Og of Bashan was a giant.
Well, no, it would be that he's Nephil.
Nephil.
Nephil, right.
But of course, he wasn't
saying that Nephil means giant, and right, okay, gotcha.
He wasn't even that. He was a Repha.
You're only as good as Nephil.
Right.
So
I mean, I just read the verse. He's a Repha. He was not a Nephil. He was a Repha. So now, what you have to do? Okay, we're moving ahead way too fast. Let me just take it back a few steps. So for one, in this book, I just kind of covered what everybody and anybody's saying about him, from anonymous blog posts to peer-reviewed journal articles.
Oh yeah. Well, let's look at that. Look at this. You got, for somebody who has hardly anything in the Bible about him, you have a 3-page, table of contents, and you begin over here with the Targumim, the Midrashim, the Talmud, the Jewish writings of the intertestamental and even later period, much later, in fact. And then you go down. You're covering topically, beginning on page 61, and then you go into dictionaries, Bible dictionaries. You go into commentaries, and you keep on going on into commentaries all the way to the end. Kylan Dalich being your last one.
Right.
This is like, if you want to know about Og of Bashan, this is for the next 100 years. This is going to be the key, the touchstone text on the topic. I'm just going to say, just Google Ken Ammi and buy his book, and you'll know everything that anybody's ever said about Og of Bashan, more than you ever wanted to know.
More than I want to know for sure.
So yeah, it's part reference. So that's part of the point to me is let's see what everybody's saying about him, and then let's actually dissect it, because like where you started there with the rabbinic material, we're talking about from a couple hundred years into AD into millennia later.
Right.
The thing is that this is actually common where people notice a biblical character about whom very little is told, and then they go on to write. We generally don't know what their motivation was. It could be historical fiction. It could be a fraud. It could be a hoax. It could be whatever it was. But we end up with tall tales about Og throughout the millennia. Okay, so he's made his way into a century, millennia's worth of all kinds of folklore. From that, he who in reality lived centuries post-flood. Well, guess what? The folklore has him actually being pre-flood, and he survived the flood by hanging on to the side of the ark. Noah would feed him through the window of the ark.
So, okay.
You know
what? There's a reason for that, though, and the reason is what? Why they would make this? Why they would draw that conclusion that he was pre-flood? Because the word Nephilim occurs in Genesis 6.
Right.
And so they're kind of drawing some kind of weird deduction from that.
The thing is, when we're talking about something like particularly midrashim, we're talking about sermonizing homilies, right? We're not talking about strict. And so whatever their motivation was just to tell a story about him. And then it goes on to say that post-flood, he confronted the Israelites. He lifted up an entire mountain to throw at them. And, he became larger than life, much larger than life.
Kind of like Kim Jong-un, he was kind of like the King. I mean, if the folklore that they believe in or are taught, at least in North Korea, is similar to what you just said.
Yeah. But another issue is what has been made of him in in more modern times, where the obsession is to puff up biblical nephilology, because biblical nephilology, when it comes down to it, ends at the flood, full stop, and that's not very exciting.
Oh.
Right?
we need to find a better way to market that.
Yeah, we need to artificially invent tall tales to get them through the flood, and then claim that, well, they still managed to somehow survive. And guess what? All of a sudden, you pull a bait and switch. You're discussing Nephilim. Then you say, well, post-flood Nephilim were mostly called Rephaim. And there you go. You just kind of go on from there until, by golly, some would accept that even Rephaim came to an end, but some would say, no. Nephilim by any other name are either still around or will return or whatever. The more exciting, what I call neo-theo sci-fi claim that they're going to make.
Neo-theo
sci-fi.
Yeah.
In fact, Jared and I were talking about this or earlier today, and she was mentioning that there are a lot of those promoting this whole Nephilim thing, that they are alive and active today, They're concealed. We can't really see them, and they're going to be coming out very soon.
Yeah, because it's really a good idea to claim that the evidence is that there is no evidence. We know they're here because we can't figure out where they are, but they're here. And worst of all, incidentally, the really clever ones, because if they're claiming that Nephilim were very, very, very tall, and they're saying they're here, and you say, well, where? And they can't show them to you, then what they do is, this is why I call it neo-theo sci-fi. What they'll do is say that the genetic engineering has gotten so precise that by now, guess what? Nephilim look exactly like you and I.
Wow.
So how can you identify a hybrid who is the enemy of God and his people, and we're going to have to battle it to the death? They look exactly like a human being. I mean, that's incredibly dangerous right then and there. To claim that you're going to point at a human being and say, you're actually not human. And I know that because you look like a human. I mean,
there's somewhat of a circular reasoning, you know.
That's just tragically dangerous to speak like that.
So what do you, one very, very interesting verse that uses the word Nephilim is Numbers 13:33, you know, and we saw some of the sons, the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who are of the Nephilim. We were in their own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. That's from the American Standard Version. So you can see how, I guess you can see from this verse how the word came to be associated with giants, because we were as grasshoppers in their sight. So how do you interpret that reference to them?
Okay, that's perfect. There's two giant issues right there. So one of them,
two giant issues.
Yeah, there you go. Are these guys going to play for San Francisco one day, or New York in the NFL? I don't know.
One of the opening chapters in the book, the entire chapter is about that one verse, because that is the single verse upon which post-flood Nephilology is based. Without it, you got nothing. So think about that for a second.
Okay. In other words, they're reading that verse back into Genesis 6 then.
Right. So how is it hermeneutically sound that you're literally going to build an all-encompassing theory upon one verse? It's not. Yeah. And then what happens is they start pulling other verses into that black hole. So that's why you end up reading and misreading Genesis 6:4 based on what you read much later on. So let's get back to the word for a second. And so the word giant, which is modern day, vague, generic, subjective, and multi-usage word, and that's important. There's a difference between a word's meaning or definition versus usage. Ended up in our English Bibles because they were just rendering the Greek version, which used the term gigantes, or sometimes gigas. So the Septuagint used the term gigantes to render, not translate, to render, get this, Nephilim and Giborim and Rephaim. And to me, it was a terrible idea to render three very, very different words with one single word, because it causes this kind of confusion.
So what are those three words again that it uses?
Nephilim, Giborim, and Rephaim.
Okay.
So what happens is people either chase an English word around the Hebrew Bible, or they chase a Greek word around the Hebrew Bible, and they just kind of they see where the word appears, and then they draw these lines and think, well, we have these data points, and I'm drawing this line. Well, the data points are real, but the way you're drawing the line is illegitimate, because you're not recognizing, you have different concepts. There's different words that mean different things behind that. So anyhow, that's just the background etymologically of how the word giant ended up in English Bibles. And so the point is, since it's just rendering either Nephilim or Rephaim, or in the Greek, Nephilim, Rephaim, and Giborim, that shows you right there it has nothing to do with height. It doesn't imply anything about height whatsoever, period, full stop. because it's just rendering words that don't have anything to do with height.
So what is
Nephilim.
the whole grasshoppers in your sight thing?
Okay, so now we're back to that. So I could literally, like I said, I wrote an entire chapter just about that one verse. So what's important to know is to interact with the narrative, which is that this is the 12 spies that were sent into the land to reconnoiter it. They all come back. There's an original report given to the Israelites. Keep in mind, the Israelites didn't see nothing. There's the 12. The 12 come back. A report is presented that's accepted as is. Then Caleb discerns that there's some concern, so he chimes in to encourage. And then the 10, okay, so you have Caleb. It turns out Joshua sides with him, so that's 2. And then the 10 discourage. Then we're told that they presented an evil or bad report, and then we're given that report. So verse 11, or 33 rather, is part of that evil report. And so this is just their assertion. This is just their claim. This is what they're saying. And all indication all over the entire Bible is that what they said was just simply false. It was literally just a fear-mongering, scare tactic, tall tale on the level of don't go in the woods, because they were so afraid of what was going on in the land. And what was that? Well, the original report told us. It told us that there's various people groups, that they were strong. Notice nothing about height, just that they were strong, and that they live in big, well-fortified cities. Okay, so now you think yourself contextually in terms of history. Here you have Israelites who are itinerant tent dwellers, and they're being told, guess what? You're going to enter the land, and you're going to confront multiple people groups who are strong, and they live in well-fortified cities. Have fun with that. So that's what Caleb discerned, is that there was concern about that. So he was like, hey, God's on our side. Get her done. We can do this. And now even in the 10, in their original rebuttal, as it were, to Caleb, even they say, well, the people are stronger than us. That they don't even bother. They didn't mention anything about height. How is that even relevant? They said, well, no, they're stronger than us. So they're obviously intimidated to the point that they go on to make a statement, verse 33 and 32 and 33, which contains 5 assertions about which the whole entire Bible knows nothing, absolutely nothing. And moreover, they contradict Moses, they contradict Caleb, they contradict Joshua, they contradict God, and they contradict the whole entire rest of the Bible, because all of them, as an example, affirm that people groups such as the Anakim were in the land, but never say a single word about Nephilim, not once, not ever, period, full stop. And that's just getting started with the number of problems there are with that verse. But the bottom line is every indication is that it was just a straight up, made up tall tale that these guys decided to tell the congregation of Israel who didn't see nothing. They're like, hey, we saw this. And to this day, people are just picking up this verse, running with it, actually believing it, and using it as the premise for their entire theory.
In Numbers 13:32, it says that they were men of great stature, though. So,
right, but what does stature mean? Does stature mean tall, or
it's
reputation, or
according to I had it up here on my screen. It's the okay, I had it. Nisha. It's midah is the word for. Yeah, midah is the word. Measure size. This is Holiday's lexicon. A measure size. Stature. Yeah, that's the idea of height, according to the Hebrew lexicons.
Which is fine with me. Let's just take it as referring to height. Okay. So what? What? Great stature. What does that mean? Great stature.
Well, that's the explanation for why they saw themselves as grasshoppers in the sight of the people.
So let's go back just the steps. Okay, so great stature is just as vague, generic, subjective, and multi-usage as the term giant, or tall, or big, or huge. It's purely subjective, all of it. So now, were there people in the land that were of quote-unquote great stature? Sure, because, for instance, in Deuteronomy 2, we're told that the Anakim were tall. Okay, tall. Okay, subjective to what? Well, the average Israelite male in those days was 5 foot even, maybe 5'3". So what does tall mean? I have no idea. Maybe 6 feet, maybe six and a half.
So you're
right?
saying that they might have been somewhat taller than the average Israelite, but they weren't necessarily like 9 feet tall or something like that.
Right. So the original report lists, I think it was 6 different people groups that they encountered. And yeah, some of them were taller than the Israelites. So what?
Yeah. And so
what does that have to do with anything, right?
So it's interesting that the one really, really clear reference we have, I mean, we have an exact measurement of Goliath's height. His height was 6 cubits in a span.
That's an issue right there, but go ahead.
Well, he's never called a Nephilim or a Nephil. He's so in other words, it's assuming for the moment that that's a proper rendering or translation of the verse. He's not associated with the Nephil or the Nephilim, I should say.
Okay, so I'll show you how all this is tied together if you talk really fast. So for one, we have 2 specific heights in the Bible. One is Goliath and one is an Egyptian man. The Egyptian man was like 7.5 feet. Goliath, you got an issue there because the Masoretic family of manuscripts has him as 6 cubits in a span. So, just over 9 feet. But the earlier Septuagint and the earlier Dead Sea Scrolls and the earlier Flavius Josephus have them at 4 cubits in a span, which is just shy of 7 feet.
Yeah,
so
pretty tall.
Pretty tall,
especially if you're going up against a young boy.
Well, pretty tall even for us, and I mean just shy of 7 feet. That's okay. Your average basketball player, none of them make it over 8 feet. So fine, NBA level.
Yeah,
but especially if you compare them to guys, Israelite men who are 5 foot or 5'3". Well, yeah, that's even.
And a 7.5 foot guy or whatever. I mean, that's a little more plausible, really, than for purposes of battle. Because if you've seen someone it's an affliction to have giantism. If you reach 9 feet, you've got physical problems that might not make you the best warrior.
But the obsessive.
And you're a really good target.
Yeah, you're a really good target.
But the obsessive Nephilologists, they'll tell you this isn't about giantism. That's just a mutation. This is about the result of angels and humans mixing, which somehow resulted in very agile, very tall people.
So that's why we're zeroing in on this, because this is something we've never seen in experience. A person who reaches these extremely high statures where it's not a defect. They'll shorten their lives and actually give them difficulty in life. Instead, we're looking at these super beings they're proposing.
And incidentally, I know that about this stage of the conversation, I always get the feedback of that I'm denying quote unquote giants or whatever. If Og was like 12 feet tall, good for him. I mean, I could care less. My only concern is what are we actually accurately being told and understanding, right?
Right.
So
what you're raising is important here, and I jotted something down, and then we're going to go to just a short break. But it is those who take a little bit of information from Scripture and build an entire theology around it, which then spreads and becomes popular among certain groups. It doesn't just occur here. Rick Warren, a few years back, did a book on the prayer of Jabez, if anyone recalls that.
Yeah.
And so you have this, kind of small section, not very much said about Jabez and this prayer that he prayed, and somehow this is the magic prayer to get you everything you need to have in life. And so the book is spreading everywhere. And I'm going, okay, how does this feel? How does it mount up in Scripture? And then people go, well, my Bible says. Now we have a sponsor about that.
Yeah, they do, because, it's, we all know that awkward feeling when someone in a Bible study says, I wish the Bible didn't have all those verses about hell. Or when you're having couples devotions and your spouse says, I'm just not comfortable with verses that teach a traditional view of marriage. Or when you're sitting in church and you're thinking, why do all the Bibles I read always have to agree with what conservative pastors are teaching? Well, that's why we're introducing the My Bible. It's guaranteed the most comfortable Bible you'll ever own. We've spent literally minutes creating a way you can have the Bible that's perfect for you. You used to have to go down some dark back alley to get a Bible like this, but not anymore. Just write down all the places where you want to make your Bible more comfortable for you, and then email them to us or enter them into our handy online form, and the results speak for themselves. Yolanda from Portland says, now that I have my Bible, I never worry that my white male pastor sermons might actually be right. Ben from seminary says, my Bible gave me the confidence I needed to drop out of my Hebrew and Greek classes. Renee from Madison says, every single one of my anti-capitalist, anti-police, and anti-social protest chants now comes from my Bible. So when someone throws an uncomfortable verse at you, you can say, that's not in my Bible, available at mybible.cult. So if you want to have 12-foot Nephilim who are like super beings, you just get the My Bible. They were offspring of some bizarre whatever. Yeah.
In fact, on the point we were making right before the commercial that Don made, check out this quote from Steve Quayle. The understanding of Nephilim is the Rosetta Stone for understanding all of Scripture.
It's the key.
I mean, this is why I coined the term gigorexia nervosa, which I define as an obsession with seeing giants and just making them up where they're nowhere to be seen.
Well, whenever somebody says, here is the key that everybody else has missed for 2,000 years for how to understand the Bible properly, I'm sorry. I've already tuned you out if you're saying that.
So now, if you don't mind, I'm going to attempt to make it back to Og.
Let's do that.
So, and actually, we're going to finish up with Goliath as a way to get to Og. Okay, so Goliath was a Philistine Gathite of the Anakim of the Rephaim. So he's a Philistine due to the region where he lived, a Gathite due to the city in which he lived, of the Anakim clan of the Rephaim tribe. So Anakim were a subgroup of Rephaim.
Was he part of the Skywalker family? Anakin? I'm sorry.
Actually, Anakin, I-N, is the Star Wars character.
Right,
and that would actually be the Aramaic version of plural Anakites.
But I heard the word Gath in there, and that's where Goliath was from. Do people try to make play on that connection there sometimes, or not? The fact that Og was connected to the same town as Goliath.
Well, Og was specified of reigning over Bashan, and I mean, I would imagine that was just one of the regions.
Okay.
But so what happens is, guess what? We're right back to Numbers 13:33, right? Because the illogic goes, if we ignore the narrative, if we actually just pick up that verse, actually believe it and run with it, if, that's a big if, then what happens is you have the Anakim being correlated to Nephilim, right? They come from Nephilim. Forget asking how. Forget that the Bible doesn't say a single word about it. Forget that you now have to literally artificially invent ways to get Nephilim past the flood, which incidentally would imply that God failed, right? He meant to get rid of him, by golly. He didn't get the job done. He missed a loophole, whatever. So we have to grant a tremendous amount of non-information. But okay, so see, since they're asserting that Anakim are somehow related to Nephilim, then there you have it. Since Goliath was one of the Anakim, then by definition, he's a Nephil, and that seals the deal. Forget that it's utterly illegitimate. And in fact, another issue with that verse is a textual one, that if you go read it in the Septuagint, it's actually verse 34. Guess what? There's no mention of the Anakim whatsoever. It's just completely missing.
So is there a yellow brick road path from Goliath to Og in the Bible?
In the Bible, the only path would be that they are both of the Rephaim tribe. Goliath is specified to be of the Anakim clan of the Rephaim tribe. We don't know about Og. We just know he's a Repha. So now, since somebody would have to exclusively rely on a non-Septuagint version of the evil report in Numbers 13:33. So that's for starters. You have to rely on one verse, and you can't rely on the Septuagint version of it. You have to rely on the Masoretic version of it. Okay, so that's two steps right there that are iffy.
And you say, but you also can't rely on the Dead Sea Scrolls version of it?
Well, no, that's
okay.
a different issue. Dead Sea Scrolls was about Goliath's height.
Okay.
This we're talking about Numbers 13:33. So you have to rely exclusively on that one single verse. You have to rely exclusively on the non-Septuagint version of it in order to say, well, Anakim are somehow related to Nephilim. We have no idea how, because that's obviously unbiblical in terms of reliability.
Or
so you have to invent a way to get them past the flood in one way or another. All of those ways that people have invented imply that God failed. He meant to get rid of them, but couldn't get the job done or missed a loophole, and the flood was, much of a waste. Okay. So then you say, well, because the non-Septuagint version of this one single verse correlates specifically Anakim to Nephilim, we'll just make that nice and watered down and generic. We'll just assert that means all Rephaim were related to Nephilim. See, you're literally just taking these huge leaps and bounds of logic and theologic and biologic to somehow get all Rephaim to actually be something like Nephilim 2.0. And that's how you get Og as a Nephil. But moreover, so Numbers 13:33 is the second and only other biblical reference to Nephilim beyond Genesis 6:4. Genesis 6:4 provides no physical description of them whatsoever. So the only one we have is in Numbers 13:11, which has them as being very, very, very tall. And that's unreliable. So bottom line is we don't have a reliable physical description of them. But that's okay. Ignore that. Just pick up verse 33, run with it. And then you run back to Deuteronomy 3:11. And guess what? Since we're told about his bed, then that's good enough. He must have been in a field because he slept on a big bed. Because notice, we're not told how tall Og was. Period. We have no physical description of him whatsoever.
He could have been a midget for all we know.
We just need a lot of sleeping room.
So then the issue becomes, because his bed was large, ergo he was large. That might work. That might be logical, but in my mind, for various reasons, it's a non sequitur. So for one, it's the term edes in Hebrew is what's being translated by most as bed, but scholars have dug into the etymology, and some think it refers to a coffin or a sarcophagus, and some to a dolem, which is like one of those stones like you would have two and one across the top, kind of like Stonehenge, right? That would be a form of a dolem. That would be some sort of marker of his territory or somehow
It
related
could have
to
been almost like a signpost, a stone signpost.
something like that, right? Like a memorial type of thing.
So, go ahead.
Now, just digging into that just a little more, let's say that it was a coffin or sarcophagus. Well, we know, I gave these examples in the book. We know that the sarcophagus of King Tut was a lot bigger than he was. And in Egypt, giant coffins or sarcophagi have been found, but guess what? They contain 3 skeletons. So it wasn't, if it had been empty, it would have been, wow, what a great tall tale. You can invent whatever you want. But oh, by golly, the evidence was right before us is that it was big, not because the person in it was big, but because it was meant to contain more than one body. So, okay, whatever. Set that aside. Let's just say it was a bed because that's just nice and convenient. So is it logical, really, that regular guy, me, could measure my bed, subtract roughly a foot, and get a good estimation of my height? Yeah. But then also, if you measured my bed, you'd think I'm 5 times wider than I actually am. But, okay, set that aside. Can you really correlate me with an ancient sovereign who's, living the lifestyles of the rich and infamous? I mean, I don't know. I would question that. I mean, I'm not an ancient king and enjoying luxuries living in whatever kind of castle he might have had. But okay, let's just go beyond that. The issue is that, particularly at a ziggurat known as Etemenanki, a bed of such dimensions was found, but it's not something to be slept upon. It's a ritual object upon which supposed gods and alleged goddesses would mate. So even if this is God's quote-unquote bed, it doesn't even necessarily imply it's something he slept on. And of course, people sleep on beds that are much bigger than themselves for luxurious reasons. There's companies that specifically build ridiculously large beds. So that's an interesting archaeological find because it tells us that the reason it was Og's bed is because it had something to do with the cult of his of his region.
So who are the people who are promoting these bizarre ideas about the Nephilim? Where do we, not that I'm going to go looking for them, but where are they found from among those who want to find them?
So I'll give you an example I've given on another show that someone latched onto. Is, for instance, when I got into bodybuilding, I'm like, okay, how do I do it? Well, I'm going to go online and look at bodybuilding, and guess what? You're going to get returns from professional bodybuilders, and then you're going to try to do what they do, and then you're going to find out it doesn't really work.
Yeah.
One, I'm just a regular guy. I'm not bodybuilding for a living, and I'm not pumping myself full of steroids and human growth hormones and all that stuff. And no, sorry, I can't consume like 5 chickens per day with a dozen eggs. I can't do it. It's just not going to work. And
and some of it is also genetics.
It absolutely, no question about it. Some of it's genetics. So then you go online, you type in Nephilim, and you're going to get what I refer to as the pop researchers. So not necessarily having any credentials whatsoever, but just they're popular. And these are the guys selling the neo-theo sci-fi. So the more exciting, the better. And I've said this many times, if they were just admitting that they're doing fiction, fantastic, because their tall tales are fascinating and they're very exciting and they're really interesting to listen to. But when you actually start dissecting them, it doesn't work, bottom line. But that's part of the reason why I wrote a book that also covers what legitimate scholars say on these issues, because I found that as soon as they make an error in this one key point, it's like the line of dominoes falls over. So they all end up sounding the same because they're all arguing the same way. In this case, you pick up number 1333, you knock that domino over, and you can knock over Genesis 6:4, you can knock over Deuteronomy 3:11, and all of it gets turned into this grand theory. So that's why I was saying when we started, with the precious little we're told, if you mishandle one little detail, it really does turn into a big, big mess down the line. That sounds wonderful, but it's definitely not biblical. And so there's people who literally do make their living off of this stuff. And if you think about it, it's like, okay, so when I go pay my bills, I have to rely on this stuff. That means relying on viewership, right? And so how am I going to just repeat the same stuff to them all the time? I can't. I got to keep coming up with increasingly more exciting, bizarre, and out there
Keep innovating.
stuff, right? For example, Stephen Quayle, again, who I quoted earlier, saying that the only way to kill these neo-Nephilim is to use copper-tipped spear points and all this stuff. I mean, where do you come up with this stuff?
Where did they come from?
But you got to come up with something new, because if you're being interviewed on the 10th show that week,
that sounds kind of like how do you kill a werewolf? You shoot him with a silver bullet. It's kind of like that, right?
Yeah. And so guess who's selling the silver bullets? I am. Now. Yeah, here's how to order. But no, seriously. And here's another point that if you go online or any bookstore or whatever, and you're looking up what Christians have debated, they've debated essentially every single topic you could possibly imagine, including the ones for which they're most famous, right? If you're specializing in a certain field of theology, you'll be debating that topic. Now, name to me two of these super popular Nephilim giant guys who make their living off of this stuff. Name two who have debated this issue.
I don't know any of them by name anyways. You mentioned Stephen Quayle. I don't think I've heard his name.
I know one. I know wow, his name literally popped out of my head right now. That is wild.
Well,
do you mention him in your book?
Oh yeah, I do. I can definitely tell you I've reached out to a few of these guys, and they won't have any. The second they discern that I actually want to question them on their claims, end of discussion. They want nothing to do with it. Gary Wayne is his name. I know he debated somebody because he debated me.
Okay.
And then I debated someone called TJ Stedman, but he's nowhere nearly as well known as like Gary Wayne and these other guys, nowhere even close. So to me, that's bizarre. Why is it these guys are making a living off of this stuff and they only go on shows where they have a platform on which to say whatever they want in a completely unchallenged manner, and nobody ever holds them accountable for what they're saying? It's bizarre, just right then and there. It's bizarre, at least.
So Ron's question about who's buying into this and sort of helping to promote it and enrich their teachers, it's not like tied to the Hebrew roots movement, for example, or something like that. It's just it's a whole different category of mythologists, if you will, people who like the myth and assume because it's a popular myth that therefore is a true story.
Well, it's not only that, but I mean, now you just gave me the name Gary Wayne. Never heard of this guy before. It says here he wrote a book called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy: How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humanity.
Oh.
Or enslave humankind is what's on the cover. So in other words, they're making money. And oddly enough, the publisher is called Trusted Books. As soon as I see that title, I don't trust any of their books.
I don't trust it.
Right. So it says in the About the Author section on Amazon, it says Gary Wayne is a Christian contrarian. But what that tells me is he's a guy who Paul warns us about. People who specialize in controversial things and questionable things. The Bible actually warns us about this kind of person. In other words, whatever you say, I'm going to try to take the opposite point of view. He's a Christian contrarian who's maintained a lifelong love affair with biblical prophecy, history, and mythology. His extensive study has encompassed the Holy Bible and Gnostic scriptures, the Quran, Bhagavad Gita, Gilgamesh, and other ancient epics, which makes me wonder, well, what do those things have to do with the Bible? There's even a questionable amount of relevance they have for understanding the biblical text at all. You know, it's interesting background material, but people have tried to, even scholars have tried to make too much of them at times. So yeah, so this is, did Gary Wayne just come out of nowhere with this stuff, or has he been around for a while?
Okay, let me just say a few things. One is, as far as I know, he's a legitimate Christian, and I don't have a right to question that. Okay. But what he teaches on this stuff is demonstrably false, full stop. I mean, that's...
Well, it's sensationalistic, and it's designed, it's kind of almost like paranoid. There's this secret society. So.
But see, I'll give you an example of what happened in our debate. So if he's been claiming for decades that Nephilim were giants, by which he means very unusually tall, okay? I was, I guess, rude enough to just ask him, well, how do you know how tall they were? And he said, oh, I don't know how big they were. And so I said, well, then you can't keep calling them giants. And he flatly refused. He affirmed that he will continue referring to them as giants after having admitted he has no idea how big they were. That's the mindset you're dealing with, is, wait a minute, you built your entire persona career-wise on making this claim. You just admitted it's illegitimate. And now you're being asked if you're going to back off, and you flatly refuse. I mean, that speaks volumes right there. So part of it is going through all the myth, all the legend, and Gary Wayne does this a lot. It doesn't matter when somebody said something. It doesn't matter where. It doesn't matter how. It doesn't matter what level of validity. It doesn't matter if it was millennia after the fact. You just take all those data points and you mash them together into grand theory. And boy, that grand theory sounds grand. It really does. But that's part of it. It's just literally mashing everything together. And another thing is what I refer to as keyword-based theology. So let's say that you go on a legitimate website like blueletterbible.org. You look up a keyword. It shows you every single verse in which it appears in the Bible, and then you just tie those together, regardless of context. That's irrelevant. You just, like I keep referring to the data points. The data points are there, they're real, but then it's how you string them together. And then you come up with this narrative based on keywords rather than on actual meaning or context. I'll give you a good example of that. So, another claim about the Rephaim, and therefore Og, is that they are the living dead. That's what they are, you know. And why is that? Well, because the root word Repha, for one, it's notoriously complicated. In my book, What Does the Bible Say About Giants and Nephilim? I got a whole chapter just about the Rephaim. Now, so the word Repha has such a wide range of meaning. It can refer to healing. It can refer to death, amongst other things. So, there you go. So it can refer to death. And now in the ancient Near East pagan literature, like the Ugaritic texts, it refers to how recently deceased kings or heroes were referred to as kings or heroes. But after they've been dead for a while, they were referred to as the ancient equivalent of Rephaim. And then there were rituals whereby you could call them by name and you could summon them from the dead to attend these feasts or whatever. And so you take the root word, you take one of the usages of the root word, you slap pagan theology on top of that, and then you go, hey, therefore all Rephaim are like these zombie-like living dead entities. Well, wait a minute. The biblical indication is Rephaim, which is good old-fashioned human beings.
Right.
But you have to kind of pile a bottomless pit of assertions on top of each other to make them something that's just really unrecognizable anymore. Right. So that's what I keep going back to this point about you make a little error here and it knocks over this whole line of dominoes and you end up with a big mess at the end. But it's a nice looking, exciting mess, that's for sure.
Huh.
Well, and one of the draws to this, as we kind of move toward wrapping up here, one of the draws to this, I would suggest, is it's almost Gnostic in a sense, because
Oh,
you
yeah.
think you now have a secret knowledge that no one else really has, and you have the inside track on what's really happening. And how do you know that? Because I have an understanding of the Nephilim and who they are and where they came from. But that secret understanding is not borne out in the text of Scripture. It is, as you point out, taking a little bit of a mention that we have in Scripture, adding definitions that the words themselves don't necessarily carry, and then creating mythology around that that's piled onto it, and it makes you feel like you have this inside scoop, which isn't true.
So let me just take this one level deeper into the realm of spiritual warfare, because I'm not the kind of researcher that sits in an armchair, does research, writes a book, and I'm done with it. I actually discuss these issues on an ongoing basis, and I mean every single week I'm discussing Nephilim, giants, and all this stuff with multiple people online, like ongoing. And I kind of discern that there's some spiritual warfare behind it. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, okay, let's look at this Numbers 13:33 thing. It's a report that was born out of being disloyal and unfaithful to God himself. Okay, that tells you something right there. Now you're relying exclusively on utterly unreliable, unfaithful, disloyal, and by the way, contradictory embellishers who encouraged the whole nation to rebel against God and not trust that he would be able to give them a victory in the land.
Right.
That event, it was what caused God to say, well, guess what? You're going to wander the wilderness for another 4 decades.
40 years, right.
This entire generation passes away, and I'm going to have a new one, except for Caleb and Joshua. Okay. And now you take that level of spiritual warfare, and from that has been born millennia's worth of myth and legend about Nephilim. Millennia's worth. To this very day. Now you do something today, like go on one of these book-selling websites, type up Nephilim, and you're going to mostly get the pop researcher stuff, and specifically type in Nephilim romance. That is a cottage industry. Romance novels about Nephilim. That's the level to which we've taken it, where now it's these sort of sexual fantasies about interacting with those beings at that intimate level. So to me, there is a spiritual warfare aspect of it, to where I can argue the biblical case to people until I'm blue in the face, and they say, well, no, because this one verse says otherwise, and I'm going to fully trust that and build my entire theology on it. I mean, yeah.
You know, unfortunately, we deal with this, as you know, we deal with this sort of thing, not this particular topic, but this sort of thing in a lot of areas. As Midwest Christian Outreach, we had to deal with this with Way Down Workshop, where we discover God hates fat people. If you're fat, you can't get into heaven. Well, that's kind of a myth. The Enneagram, all of a sudden we have the true understanding of God. Well, the cosmos is the first incarnation of the Christ. God is a panentheist. He is a panentheistic God. And the idea that Jesus is God, co-equal with the Father, just doesn't really wash, because the Enneagram really refutes all of that. And then we have, I don't know, Russell Moore at Christianity Today, who's an Enneagram advocate. Does he not realize that it's in conflict with the historic biblical faith? So we have that on a grand scale there, but we have that in this cottage industry over here with a whole following on Nephilim. It's the same kind of a thing, this secret knowledge that you can't get from the Bible, so you invent it and hold it on an equal plane with the Bible. Isn't that just Gnosticism?
Well, the thing is that there's a certain shtick, and that's why it all comes down to the same thing. It comes down to getting a few key things wrong and then not helping but ending up with faulty conclusions. Like I think when it comes to actual theology proper, that's why there's certain basic things that a lot of people have pointed out, that if when it comes to Trinitarian theology, right, if you deny the three persons, you end up in modalism.
Right.
If you deny the equality, you end up in subordinationism. If you
Right.
deny the monotheism, you end up in polytheism, right? These basic principles that show us that you can make one little mistake and it can really cost a lot. And then it becomes a shtick, whereby then you say, well, I'm the guy, back to Gnosticism, I'm the guy who truly understands this, and I'm here to reveal it. And then every week I have to get increasingly more exciting, because, you know, who's going to listen to the same thing
Right.
year after year?
My book sales and my followership. So, well, you know, I'm glad you have been with us. I want to show the book again, because I am able to do that, and I don't even have to take special lessons or anything.
That's how good you are.
So there we are. The king, Og of Bashan, is dead. The man, the myth, the legend of a Nephilim giant. That's good stuff. Ron, would you care to
waltz? Do you want me to waltz this?
out of here?
Okay, whatever. Let's do that. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil. Before me, our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil head provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and The Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoli Cooling. Technical assistance comes through Murphy Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Ivana Pisami, director of privacy assurance, wiretapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened. Never.
So far, not even once.
All right, now we can do the royal wave on our way out.